So thank you for signing up for this on-demand webinar, which is an introduction to Alloy's unified API. So we're extremely excited to launch this product. It represents our most major launch since launching Alloy Embedded around this time last year. And today we're going to go through why we built it, the specific engineering challenges it helps to solve, dive into use cases a little bit, and then talk about how you can get your hands on it and get started. Okay. So a quick agenda for the day. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about why an engineering team, why a product team would want to use Alloy's unified API and the specific challenges that it helps to solve. We also want to explain where unified API fits into the larger picture, right? For most folks that have evaluated integration platforms in the past, you've probably evaluated either doing an embedded iPaaS or a unified API. You probably haven't seen, both products rolled into one platform. And so we want to give some context as to why we did that. We'll go through a demo and show you the unified API in action, not just the backend and how you can actually, stand up these integrations quickly, but also the authentication process and what your end users will actually experience when they access and activate these integrations. And then at the end, we'll talk about next steps, how to get started. This is a self-serve product, spoiler alert. So we would love for you to get your hands on it, start trying it for free, giving us your feedback. And so we'll provide some context into how to do that towards the end of this. All right. So first things first, right? Why unified API? And as always, right, our goal at Alloy is to help product teams speed up integration development, but also scale their integrations in the most efficient way possible, right? And so as we kind of take a look at some of the factors that slow down integration development consistently, there are a few common areas that we found, right? And so the first is that even for similar apps, right? Let's say you're looking at ERPs, maybe you're looking at, say, NetSuite, Brightpearl, and Sun7, right? Those apps, while they have very similar target resources and the integrations that you would want to build with them would, realistically be designed to do similar things, they have varying data structures, and that requires you to perform really complex data mapping for each one of those, really from the ground up for each integration you build, regardless of the fact that, like we mentioned, the target resources are similar and what you're going after is similar, right? So that creates inefficiencies for product teams. In addition to that, you also need to worry about the infrastructure for each integration, right? So you need to be able to subscribe to webhooks for each app, pull target resources, and also build designated infrastructure for your integrations to function as needed. So thinking about things like what happens when a webhook gets dropped, for example, right? What's your reconciliation process there? If you're rate limited, how you're handling that? These are things that can be pretty time consuming for an engineering team. And while it's certainly within most product teams' capabilities, it's not necessarily the best use of time when you have a core product to build, right? And that's what we've noticed. And then designing the end user experience. Ultimately, what you want to make sure is that the experience feels native to your product, right? And so the process by which your end users access integrations, authenticate, designing all that can be extremely time consuming if you don't necessarily have the bandwidth. And so these are all taken together factors that make it so that your integration roadmap can actually, or backlog, can start to pile up pretty quickly, right? And that's the reason that a lot of product teams have more integrations on their roadmap than they can realistically get through. So how does Alloy's unified API help with that? There's many ways, but realistically, the value boils down to kind of three key areas, right? So the first is that we want to help you launch integrations faster. And the way that we're going to do that is by providing a single standardized data model across different third-party app categories, right? So the two that are available right now at the time of launch for Unified API are ERPs and e-commerce platforms. And we have CRMs coming very soon. So think like Salesforce, HubSpot, all the major players there. And the idea is that when you stand up an integration that performs a specific use case for one of these applications, you can quickly replicate it across the others too. The second benefit is that you can save time and money by leveraging Alloy's proven infrastructure, right? And that's not just true of Alloy's unified API, but of any Alloy product, right? Our embedded iPaaS, our workflow engine. The idea is that we have already built the infrastructure that you need to handle authentication, white labeling, when you're rate limited, performing automatic retries, the types of things that you would need to build in-house in order for an integration to function properly, but would ultimately be maybe not the best use of your engineering team's time. We've already done it, right? So that's something that you can rely And then the creating a native user experience, right? So we touched on this, but Alloy offers robust UI UX customization options. The most important thing that we can say here is that we make no assumptions as to how you want to present your integrations to end users. So if you want to design your own end user experience and use our APIs to abstract authentication and still offload it, you can do that. If you want to rely on our built-in authentication component and simply provide a client ID and client secret to white label the experience, you can do that. Possibilities are really quite flexible, right? Okay. So now that we've explained why we built a unified API and the specific challenges it's designed to help solve for engineers, I want to turn it over to our CTO, Greg, to get in under the hood a little bit and describe more of the how.
Thanks, Anurag. Appreciate it. So key functionality, right? Behind the scenes, there's a lot going on. When folks think about a unified API, they're typically saying, hey, we just have a standardized data model, right? And that absolutely is what is presented to the end user. But behind the scenes, there's a lot more happening to make sure that that is always in sync, the data is consistent, and it's always up to date. And so let's take a look at a few of those examples right here. So first off, we have data standardization. This is probably the most basic thing, right? So we take all the data from all the different sources. For example, in commerce, we'll say Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, WooCommerce. We standardize that in a single model, in a single schema. And then we present that to you so that you can tap into one API and access many at the same time. Now, beyond that, we also have the synchronization. And this is what really, really is important because standardization is only one half of the puzzle. You have to be able to grab accurate and live data in real time. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have data that's stale, for instance, or data that might not be 100% up to date. And so how our technology works behind the scenes is we cache the actual data in our database, and then you hit our system versus going through directly to Shopify or BigCommerce, for instance. What this allows you to do is bypass things like built-in rate limits, and also ensures that things like webhooks are never dropped because we have polling and reconciliation built into our technology. So you can always trust that when you're hitting Alloy's unified API, you're getting the most up-to-date data possible. So let's actually explore how it works behind the scenes. So on the left-hand side, we have 4 applications: Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, and Magento. What you'll notice is that the order information is different for every application. The actual key value pairs are formatted differently. In our first example, in Shopify, the order number is order underscore number. In BigCommerce, it's ID. And similarly in Magento, it's also ID. So as you can see, we have a problem here. The data is not standardized across the board. Now, if you want to tap into that information, you need to go and build an integration to each of these applications one by one. And more so, you have to actually go and read the documentation and understand what this identifier actually means in the context of each application. It's time consuming, it's exhausting, and it's a lot of work. So behind the scenes, Alloy Unified API is mapping all that to a single standardized data structure. And so what you'll see is we standardize that information and then send that to our cache. Now, behind the scenes, we're also syncing that information in real time. So what that means is, for instance, is when a new order comes into Shopify, we're subscribing to all the webhook events, all the relevant events that come in. So for instance, when an order is created, when an order is deleted, when an order is updated, we have consistent mechanism to track all that. And we're also polling every hour to ensure that no webhooks are dropped. So we always have down to the minute accuracy for every event coming into the system. In turn, you can always hit our cache and know that you're getting the most up-to-date data possible. So let's take a look at how Unified API fits into the broader picture. So at this point, we have 3 offerings, 3 distinct solutions. We have our embedded iPaaS product, which is called Alloy Embedded. We have our Flow product, which is for merchants and end users to allow them to build complex flows on their own. And of course, we have our Unified API. Now, behind the scenes, these features, these products, fit in seamlessly with one another. And we're the only player on the market that connects each of them together in a unified structured format. No pun intended. For instance, an ISV could start off with a unified API and build an integration quickly and simply and go to market very, very fast. Ultimately, as their needs and use cases evolve and get more and more complex, they can migrate to our embedded iPaaS product to build more complex flows with raw data, logic flows, you name it. And then as those requirements get even more complex, and let's say they have an enterprise client they want to support, they can migrate their client over to Alloy Flow and use our OEM offering to allow the end user, their client, to log into our system and customize their flows entirely on their own. What this gives you is an unparalleled access to managing integrations at scale. And we're the only player in the market that has all three of these offerings today. So on that topic, let's take a look at what would happen if you didn't have a unified API, how complex it would be to build a unified API structure in an iPaaS alone. So in this example, we're comparing unified API to embedded iPaaS. In the embedded iPaaS world, you would need to do a heck of a lot more than what you're doing with unified API. So on the left-hand side, once again, we have our four applications: Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, and Magento. And the same schema applies. Using embedded iPaaS, you would need to subscribe to each event possible manually. So that means building individual workflows for each of these flows. And then on top of that, you need to map the schemas for every single data flow. So we have several workflows here. Each of those workflows needs to have field mapping. And then once the field mapping is in place, you need to stream that information to your database or your data warehouse. And then finally, and only then, can you access that via an API. Now, behind the scenes, Unified API is doing all this for you, right? So if we think about the previous example, we're abstracting all the workflow step. We're also abstracting the field mapping, and we're also abstracting the database. And with the Unified API, you just hit our API, and we have all that data structured, in sync, and constantly reconciled for you. It's always up to date. So with that, let's take a look at how the Unified API works.
All right, thanks, Greg. So we're actually going to walk through the self-serve experience and set up some e-commerce integrations, right? So I'll start with BigCommerce here, click Connect App, and Alloy will automatically prompt me for the appropriate credentials. So I'll go ahead and enter our store hash here, click Authenticate. All right, and now Alloy is going to go ahead and set up that connection. And once it is set up, I'll be presented with some metadata, which I can quickly review here, like user, app name, category, several others. So I'll do that and click Next Step. And now Alloy is going to sync the data from the store that I connected. So you can see that populating here, along with the time of the most recent data sync. So once I'm comfortable with that, I can click Complete. Now it's time to make our first API call, which is exactly what Alloy is going to prompt me to do, and provides me with a development API key in order to do so. So I'll go ahead and click Send API Request. And you'll see that in the request that was sent, there are specific parameters denoting the specific endpoint we want to invoke, the product, et cetera. And then all the data that's returned to us is returned in a standardized format, which is the benefit of Unified API. So the next step will be to create a test user by invoking the post create user endpoint. And this is usually the point at which you'd install Alloy's front-end SDK, which is just adding a simple script tag to the header of your app. For our purposes today, I'm not going to do that, but typically what this would do is allow you to generate and pass a JSON web token to render our built-in auth component, which is called the embedded modal, directly from within your app. For our demo purposes, I'm going to skip that step and go straight to making the first call. And we can still preview what the end user experience looks like shortly here. All right, so now I can still configure and preview the end user experience as I mentioned. I'm going to do that with BigCommerce. So you'll see you have the option to present an intro and success page. I'll go ahead and write up a brilliant workflow description here. And go ahead and click Save. And now if I click Preview, you'll be able to see intro page that we just set up along with the description. You can also use Alloy's Secrets Manager and white labeling capabilities to remove that powered by Alloy here and even present your own app's logo in the OAuth flow if you want. Once again, your user here will be prompted to enter their store hash and authenticate. And that's the full flow. And again, what you're seeing in the back is Alloy's backend in the background because it's a preview, but your user would interact with this component directly from your app or via external link, depending on what you prefer. So now that that connection is set up, all I need to do to activate other commerce integrations with that common model is toggle them on. I'm going to do that for a few here. And as you can see, configuring descriptions is the same process for each. If I do that with Shopify here, and again, you'll see Alloy, prompts your user, for the appropriate credential, depending on the app that they're trying to authenticate. Ultimately, the auth flow will look fairly similar. See a success page. And I could continue to do this, with WooCommerce and Magento, right? I won't do that because you get the point here, but that's how simple it is to set it up with the unified API. Okay. So now that we've taken a look at a full demo, let's recap what we've gone over today. So first and foremost, right, the challenge that Alloy's unified API is designed to solve, well, it enables you to rapidly launch real-time access-based integrations with multiple apps from the same category. And when we say access-based, think of that in contrast to something that's action-based and embedded iPaaS, where access-based means, hey, I can access this real-time data, present it in my application however I want. Whereas action-based would be, okay, now we have this integration, let's build a complex workflow that helps my user automate a key process, right? So that's kind of the way to think of the distinction there. And then, as I've mentioned, we have two distinct models supported already, one for ERPs and one for common e-commerce platforms. And we also have a common model for CRMs coming soon. So, think Salesforce, HubSpot, all the, usual major enterprise players that, you would use there. And then with the addition of unified API to our embedded iPaaS and workflow orchestration tools, Alloy is now fully a complete and composable integration platform, right? And what we mean by composable is it's not all in one. You don't have to buy everything out of the box and, pay for and use all of it. Like Greg mentioned earlier, if you just have a real-time use case for an integration that you want to get stood up today, you can start with unified API even on the free level and do that, and eventually add embedded iPaaS and flow as needed. But you're never forced to use any of the products that you don't need to for your integration use cases. And I think that's crucial. And then lastly, Alloy's infrastructure was built by engineers for engineers. Obviously, unified API is a technical product. We expect engineers to get their hands dirty with it. And so we made sure that scalability, security, compliance with major regulation, robust error handling, API updates, any of the nitty-gritty technical things that you need to focus on when you're building integrations, we have taken care of for you so that you can focus on the actual use case, how the data actually needs to be delivered and mapped, customizing the end user experience, the things that are actually going to create value for your user and then subsequently your business. All right, so as usual, before wrapping up, we'll just cover some next steps. So if you want to discuss your integration use case, whether that's because you're not sure that unified API is the right solution for you, or because you just want to discuss things more broadly and see how Alloy might be able to help, that's great. Feel free to use the QR code on the screen to book a call with our team directly. Alternatively, if you're ready to jump in and just want to sign up for the product and go through the exact same flow you just saw me go through on the demo, that's great. Visit app.runalloy.com/sign up, where you'll be prompted to create a free account. And we're excited to get engineers into the product and see what you all build with it. All right. So thank you again for signing up for and watching this on-demand webinar introducing Alloy's unified API. We hope it answered any questions that you had and got you excited to get your hands dirty and start, trying the product. We're always, open to any feedback that you all have. So please let us know what you think, and we'll be in touch with more product updates as they come.
Thank you all.